This week we are shifting into talking about brass instruments. The Mnozil Brass are a hilarious comedy group that also happen to play brass instruments pretty well. Um, so we're gonna watch one of their videos here in a bit, and I think you'll enjoy it. It's hilarious. There are two major types of valves on modern brass instruments. You have a rotary valve, which twists, and you have a piston valve, which goes up and down. The purpose of each of these is to take the airstream through an additional set of tubing, thus lowering the pitch on that particular harmonic partial series. Basically, it just gives them the ability to play fully chromatically. That wasn't always the case. Prior to 1815, there were no valves on instruments. There were a couple guys, Stolzel and what's the other guy's names? Stolzel and Vernal, I think. I can't remember. Anyway, they came up with this whole concept early 19th century. Ended up by the end of the century, most composers had switched over to that. Prior to the invention of valves, the way that trumpet and horn players specifically would change pitch would be either by playing really high all the time, so the notes are closer together, or they would use a slide, much like a modern trombone. Back in the Renaissance, it was called the sackbut. Yes, that's a real word, sackbut. Or they would use what are called crooks, which were shorter and longer pieces of tubing they would take out of their instrument and put in different ones. So like you had a set of C crooks that you would have in, and then you change to trumpet in A. So you would take the C crooks out and put the A crooks in, and it was a big pain. So basically the invention of valves was for efficiency. The precursors to all of these instruments, you had the serpent, which looked kind of like a snake, had a big thing on the end. It sounded in bass clef. It had keys on it and holes like a bassoon, but it was played with a brass mouthpiece. You had an instrument called the zinc. You had, of course, the sackbut, which is the early trombone. And you had a precursor instrument called the lure, L-U-R. There's many others, but those are just some of them. Going back even further, where did they come up with the idea for this? Well, animal horns and conch shells. That's really how it started out. Just as signaling devices. So people could communicate with each other from island to island with the conch shells. And animal horns just were either a drinking vessel, because they were hollow on the inside, or they would chop off the other end, figure out some sort of mouthpiece on it, and they could use it as a signaling. And they're found all over the world. Nobody knows really where they came from. Yeah, we talked about crooks. Let's see, tubas, the big ones, the big boys. The modern family of tuba instruments was actually created by Adolf Sax. Same guy that created the saxophone. He came up with a lot of ideas, and the modern tuba really owes its origin to Adolf Sax. So there you go. Like I mentioned earlier, modern composers didn't really embrace brass instruments to start out with. The trombone, in fact, made its modern symphonic debut in Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. The whole ba-ba-ba-bum, but not until the last movement. So trombones were not really used in the orchestra until early 1800s. So Mozart only used like a sackbut part in his Requiem. That's the only time he ever wrote for him. And even then, it's usually not even played on a trombone. So sometimes they'll use an alto trombone to play that part. But Beethoven's Fifth is the first use of modern trombones. The first composer to really incorporate brass instruments in the year 1597, to use them at all, his name was Giovanni Gabrieli. And he wrote music for brass choirs, antiphonal brass choirs. You would put one on one side of your church and another brass choir on the other side of your church, and they would play back and forth to each other. Pretty fantastic sounds that they would come up with. So Giovanni Gabrieli, great guy. We're going to now watch the Mnozil Brass. You'll notice that some of their instruments are shaped a little funny. They're all made by the same company. It's an Austrian company called Schegerl. James Morrison is like the poster child for Schegerl. He's a trumpet trombone player in Australia. But these guys do a pretty decent job. So the piece we're going to watch is called Lonely Boy. And it features the guy here with the long hair, the sitting second from the right on your screen. He has kind of a strange personality, but you'll see. There's not a lot of music at the very beginning. 3.5 minutes in is when they start playing. It's worth the wait. I think you'll have fun with this. Check it out. So they're a lot of fun. Yeah. Everything they do is like that. They're just a comedy group that happens to all have master's degree on brass instruments. Okay, that's number 19. Next week, the accordion with Frankie Yankovic. See you then. Bye-bye.